When will China finally open up its borders fully to the rest of the world? It is the question that so many people want an answer to. Over the last couple of months, I've received so many messages from international students currently abroad who are enrolled in Chinese universities that so desperately want to return to China. I know waiting is tough, and not knowing an exact date makes waiting even harder. But hopefully I can offer some insights in this video. A while back, China's top respiratory expert Dr. Zhong Nanshan seemed to offer a ray of hope by saying that China's borders shouldn't open until the vaccination rate in China reaches 80 to 85%. Zhong was the expert who first announced publicly on television here in China that COVID-19 could be spread from human to human, and he played a pivotal role during the SARS outbreak. So when Zhong Nanshan speaks, people listen. Now, making that statement made it sound like borders could reopen once the vaccination rate hit that benchmark, and at the current rate, China could get there at the earliest by the end of 2021. Unfortunately, those hopes seem to have been dashed just a few days ago when Zhong Nanshan gave an interview to CGTN's Liu Xin. They spoke about quite a few issues, mostly related to domestic COVID-19 policies, but he did make a few statements that relate to the question of when borders might reopen. First, Zhong stated that the death rate associated with COVID-19 stands at around 2% globally, and if the country were to open too early, the costs associated with that would far outweigh the benefits. For China, a mortality rate of 2% is still far too high. He also stated that the current zero-COVID approach would most likely continue for a fairly long time. But how long exactly is a fairly long time? Well, here in China, it seems like there are no signs of abandoning that approach for the foreseeable future. And I'll give you two examples. Recently, we saw two trains headed for Beijing from two different directions stop mid-journey because each train had one close contact on board. All passengers were tested, with passengers in affected carriages sent into 14 days of hotel quarantine. All because of one close contact on each train. You may also be aware of Shanghai Disneyland closing its doors because one person who later tested positive for COVID-19 had visited the park. That one case resulted in more than 66,000 people being tested for COVID-19 and the park being closed completely for 2 days. Now, a while back, there were hopes, especially among the expat community here, that current border restrictions may have been relaxed in time for the Beijing 2022 Winter Olympics. But we have since learned that athletes and related personnel will be kept inside an Olympic bubble, effectively placing a barrier between them and the rest of the country. This may sound like bad news for those hoping the borders will eventually reopen, but I do believe it is not a question of if, but when. Although COVID-19 measures will be strict for the Olympics, the Games will also be a test for the country to see how well it can manage such a large-scale event with so many people entering the country from abroad. And although this is speculation on my part, I believe that we may see border restrictions start to relax by next year. But there are a few key dates to keep in mind. First is the 20th National Party Congress, which will most likely be held in or around October 2022. And the 20th NPC will be significant for a number of reasons, as most people know. In China, before important political events such as this, it is rare to see major changes take place in society, and therefore, I find it unlikely that China would abandon its zero-COVID approach before this date. But there is another major sporting event set to take place in China in 2022, the Asian Games in Hangzhou. The opening ceremony will take place on September 10th. Now, construction on the media village for the event has already been completed, and it is expected to house between 4,000 and 5,000 personnel from China and abroad, while the overall athletes village will house 10,000 athletes and 4,000 technical officials. At the very least, this indicates to me that, for now, the organisers are still expecting to welcome thousands of people from around Asia to the Games. Also, it is important to note that the Games will be held in Hangzhou, while the 20th NPC will be held in Beijing. Now, you might be thinking that I'm clutching at straws here, but hear me out. When China makes drastic changes, and abandoning zero COVID and reopening borders would be a drastic change for China, the country tends to move in steps. It has done so for the last 4 decades of reform and opening up for just about everything, and special economic zones and free trade zones are good examples of this. So what I think is that when China does decide to open its borders, it will do so slowly and in stages. So perhaps Hangzhou may be one of the first cities in China to allow some vaccinated international arrivals for the Games and only allow those people to stay within the city and maybe, for example, comply with daily testing or other restrictions. That is one possibility, but once again, I am merely speculating, so keep that in mind. Also, something else to watch is the border between Hong Kong and Guangdong. Currently, it is possible to cross the border, although there are daily quotas. Now, people from Guangdong can cross into Hong Kong without needing to quarantine, but on the way back to the Chinese mainland, you still need to comply with at least 2 weeks of hotel quarantine. When that changes, and the government in Hong Kong has said that it is working towards making that happen, it most likely will also be used as a test to see whether or not the Chinese mainland can contain the virus while fully opening to the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. If it is successful, perhaps green channels or green lanes with other regions may be on the cards following that. Also, I want to mention the quarantine facilities being built around China. Here in Guangzhou, a massive 5,000 room quarantine facility has finished construction in Baiyun district. Now, construction ended in September and it's now November, but it has not been put into use yet. Other such facilities are also being built around the country. So, why are they being built? Could it be that China will relax border restrictions and allow more people to come into China before it abandons its zero COVID policy? That is also one possibility. So to try and organize all of this into something that makes sense, here's what I think is happening. The zero COVID approach is still very popular amongst the public here in China. Although a lot of people are looking forward to being able to travel again, and for some, health codes and masks are definitely growing old, most people here are still very wary of the virus. And so far, nearly 10,000 of the roughly 126,000 COVID-19 cases that have been recorded here to date have been overseas acquired cases. But as construction for events like the Asian Games and large-scale quarantine facilities continue here in China, it feels as though people may be starting to entertain the idea that China can't be 100% COVID-free forever. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I believe that China's borders will reopen in stages. Perhaps major cities first, with better medical systems and facilities. Maybe at first, some vaccinated people from countries with lower rates of COVID will be allowed to enter China, but there will most likely be strict mechanisms in place, such as daily testing and limits on where you can travel for the first 14 days of a stay. Also, I do believe that China does want to bring back international students, but unfortunately for now, it is not a major priority, as China's economy simply just doesn't rely on education revenue to stay afloat. But I believe that when China does reopen borders, students and business people will be given priority. Remember, this is all speculation on my behalf, and I'm going with my gut based on bits and pieces of information that I've seen and heard over the last couple of months. But the final question is, when? And that certainly is the million-dollar question. The answer is, I don't know. But I think we will most likely see some border restrictions eased by at least the third quarter of 2022. I personally don't think any widespread changes will happen before October 2022 for the reasons I gave earlier. But if vaccination rates increase abroad and if China gets above 85% of the entire population vaccinated, all of the right ingredients could come together next year for China's borders to finally open just a crack. To all of the students out there who have contacted me, I feel your pain and I do hope that you can return as soon as possible. To everyone else, thank you for watching. Also, I'd like to hear your thoughts on when you think China's borders might reopen, and I'd also like to hear what you are basing your theories on. So once again, thanks for watching and bye for now.